Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Ron Quaranta, and I'm privileged to serve as the chairman of the board of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. The WSBA is a nonprofit trade association with a mission to guide and promote comprehensive adoption of blockchain technology and crypto assets across global financial markets. We're here today with members of our legal working group, which is now almost 30 of some of the world's largest and leading practitioners, legal practitioners in the space, focusing on cryptocurrencies and token offerings. I am not an attorney. I find myself spending an unhealthy amount of time with them, which is always a good conversation. And so since the founding of the legal working group, I try to balance you guys out. So for the audience, you've not lived until you've been on a conference call with 20 attorneys. And so Josh, and I'll let Josh and the others introduce themselves. Josh chairs our legal working group, who's been hard at work around primarily what started as a series of FAQs, the importance of focusing on token offerings in the proper framework and context. What's emerged over the course of time and through their efforts is a really fundamentally important framework and conversation around token offerings that we're ready to speak to the global marketplace about. So I'll leave it for smarter people than me on the stage to start talking about it. Josh, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Josh Clayman. As Ron said, I chair the legal working group for the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. As Ron also mentioned, we have over 30 lawyers who are active in the space from various firms. I should say over 30 law firms in the space who are particularly active. And one thing we all agree on is that the space is growing, it's exciting, and that our focus should be more on collaboration than on competition. So through that, we discuss a variety of issues, not just token sales, believe it or not, although that has occupied a lot of our time lately. And our goal is really to be able to provide reasoned views that we feel comfortable giving to our clients in the absence of on-point, bright line guidance. So for this particular effort, and I'll let Louis say a bit more about it, but one of the things we noticed was that just in practice, many of us, we're writing to our colleagues on the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance with questions, not giving up client confidences or anything like that, but literally saying, how would you approach this issue? What do you think? Because nobody wants to be an outlier on this. Everybody wants to feel that they have taken a reasoned view and they've really tested things out in some way. So, Louis, would you like to talk a little bit more about how this came about?
Sure. So my name is Louis Cohen. I'm a partner at Hogan Lovells and co-head of our global blockchain initiative. As Josh says, she and the WSBA legal working group, of which I'm a part of, are doing some tremendous work. But increasingly, many of us realize that the questions that Josh alluded to were really becoming very thorny. And there was some tremendous work done by Lee, Coinbase, and some others last summer, the summer of 2016, on a framework for the legal analysis of token sales. And that is, just a tremendous, I won't let Lee brag for himself, I'll brag for him, a tremendous work product and has guided, I think, many lawyers in the space. But we realized with a year plus behind us, we were all grappling with a whole range of much more specific sort of questions. And although we had guidance from the SEC over the summer and the what's called the 21A report about the DAO, and got some guidance there, and from a subsequent lawsuit the SEC brought, we really didn't have a lot to work with. And so Josh and I really said, what if we could write a series of FAQs that would be the guidance we'd love to see if the SEC provided it, and if we can get a consensus and a cooperative consensus by the leading practitioners to develop that. And that's really was the origin of the idea.
Yeah, so we do have the FAQs. They're nearly ready. We have the questions set out, and we will go through a little later in this brief announcement meeting what some of those questions are. But we also wanted to start by providing some sort of overarching principles that we've derived through many, many hours of discussing the questions and discussing the FAQs. So we're going to kind of go round robin going through some of them. I guess, Louis, do you,
Well,
or
at least
Lee,
there's
all right.
Lee goes, since you haven't
Lee, go ahead.
introduce yourself.
Lee Schneider from McDermott, Will and Emery. Recently joined McDermott, Will and Emery. I was at Debevoise and Plimpton for a number of years before that. And I just spoke on the prior panel, so apologies if I'm a little shell-shocked from 2 in a row. What Josh and Louis and Ron are trying to do here, and what I'm privileged to be working on here, is really important, because the types of questions that people are asking don't have firm answers, and by trying to set out some principles to guide people, we hope that will be useful not just to the industry but to the regulators as well, to really try to bring the community together, the community broadly defined to include token projects, regulators, people who are buying tokens, et cetera. And so one of the first principles that we wanted to share with everyone is that you really do need to focus on the essential nature of the token. And the nature of the token, you may find that you have a security, but you also may find that you don't have a security. So it's very important to really understand the features and functions of the token within the context of the blockchain project that it forms a part of or that it's native to help you drive the regulatory analysis.
Absolutely. Maybe just to add one other point, especially because I think we're live streaming here, all three of us are very mindful that we're answering, or at least attempting to provide some direction on these questions, not just from a US point of view, but this is a global issue, and token sales are conducted globally. And again, the three of us and others who are active in the space realize we can't just provide answers that work in the US and don't work elsewhere. And so we're frequently in dialogue with friends, colleagues, regulators, and others outside of the US, which also informs what we do. And I think that's just for everyone listening, particularly in other countries, we're very mindful of those other guidances and directions.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And in each country, sort of we tend to be US-centric in the US, and it's very difficult to break out of that mindset, and Lewis's reminder is very important.
You want to pick up, and then we'll keep going.
Oh, sure. So the next point, conducted properly, it's possible for a token sale of a utility token to be a sale that is not a sale of securities. So that may sound very evident to some, but given some of the press and the statements in the public, we thought it was important to make clear that as a group, we do believe that there are tokens that are not securities, and that you can have a token sale that is not a sale of securities if you do it properly.
So a corollary to that is that there are tokens that are securities. And if you want a token to be an equity security, it can be. If you want a token to be a debt security, it can be. It's a remarkably flexible instrument that can mimic existing securities very well, but it also can do things that are different from what other securities can practically do, particularly owing to smart contracts and programmation. And that is another piece of the story that we all have to bear in mind.
And as Louis mentioned, I was pleased to help Coinbase and others work on the securities law framework for blockchain tokens, which really focused on the Howey test as being the applicable test. The SEC in the 21A report on the Dow tokens also found the Howey test to be the applicable test there. And so I think we look at the Howey test and its application as really being the core to evaluating whether or not something is a security in this space.
The next one is trying to make some Howey factors more important than others is a mistake. So we all may know what the Howey factors are, but it's important to remember that the test requires an integrated look at the transaction to see if it's an investment contract. All factors have to be present. The security characterization could fall down if any one of those was not present.
Many people, it's fascinating, the three of us certainly, and many other lawyers, studied this Howey case when we were in law school, and I think we couldn't have in our wildest dreams imagine that you go into a room where it could be recited like the Pledge of Allegiance, one, investment of money, two, to the God and country, but it is. And so what I think the three of us find, particularly as people will come to us, clients will come to us and say, well, we've done the analysis already, we're there, we kind of got it, just could you give us an opinion or something? And the first leg itself tends to sometimes seem to be the obvious, but throw people off. An investment of money. It's really important to understand that courts have routinely interpreted that term very, very broadly. So unequivocally, it doesn't have to be fiat money, Bitcoin, Ether, and crypto is equivalent. But the provision of other goods and services may be an investment of money. Courts have found that something as little as providing your name and details to register for a website might be sufficient consideration to trigger that. So be very careful when you start to think about working through the legs of this Howey test, and make sure you're in dialogue with some lawyer who's really familiar with this, because there's some real important subtleties there.
And just to follow on what Louis said, investment of money and common enterprise, the first two factors of the Howey test, are often taken as a given in various contexts. But we have to really think closely about whether or not they are a given in any particular context. There's a difference between an investment of money and a purchase of goods or services. If you have a purchase of goods or services, I don't think you have an investment of money, and you need to sort of think about that carefully. Same thing with common enterprise. When we think about common enterprise and what that means, the line can sometimes look very fuzzy. I frequently go to the Union Square Green Market on Saturdays because they have these gigantic, one of the farmers has these gigantic peanut butter cookies that are absolutely delicious. And but you go to the Union Square Green Market and you say to yourself, well, is that a common enterprise? How do we analyze what we mean by common enterprise when we're talking about a marketplace? And so it's just important to really focus on what's being done or what the nature of the project and the token are.
So even though some people have questioned whether manner of sale applies, because the case that talked about manner of sale specifically said that it wasn't applying Howey, we are of the view that manner of sale matters, and that it is likely to be one of the features, one of the factors that you weigh when analyzing a token. It goes into the facts and circumstances, and depending on the efforts of the token seller, manner of sale can have a very large effect on what otherwise might be a utility token that is not a security. Because of this, we encourage token sellers to be careful in the way that they sell their tokens and what they're saying. Similarly, we encourage token sellers to police their agents and promoters, those that they may engage to promote on their behalf, to make sure that they are promoting the token sale not as an investment opportunity to the extent possible. Similarly, we caution sellers and others and regulators. I think we all need to be cautious that we don't turn the activities of distributors and resellers into a securities transaction where that would not otherwise be the case.
And picking up on that, the next element of the Howey test, which is the expectation of profit, this is one that can be some of the subtlest to get at, because very, very few tokens of the type that are commonly being contemplated here, what we loosely call utility or consumptive tokens, provide a dividend, pay a yield or a coupon. All of the traditional markers of expectation of profit are not there. Yet, all of us recognize, and certainly courts have recognized, that you don't need a token to pay a direct benefit, whether a dividend or a coupon, to have an expectation of profit. An expectation of appreciation may potentially mean that you have an expectation of profit. But you get into some very complicated questions at that point about subjectivity. Is it a buyer may expect to buy something, hey, I got a great deal on this at the flea market. You go to the green market there and you say, wow, there's a used, a used rocking chair. I'm going to pick that up. I could sell that for, twice its value. Is that the buyer unequivocally has an expectation of profit, but that's not clearly the type of expectation of profit that's expected here. So it's critical that as you design your token, you think about it. At the same time, some token issuers and folks I've talked to have really attempted to, for lack of a better term, dog whistle to prospective investors by doing everything they can to create a token that will signal, you should know this thing's going to go up in value. They do that through the words they use, referring to it as an investment. They do that through marketing materials, as Josh says. So expectation of profit is a critical one to analyze carefully and to work very closely with your counsel, not just on token design, but all these other related purposes. We believe, I think, as a group, that it's not appropriate to look at expectation of profit through the subjective views of the eyes of the purchaser, but rather what would an objective purchaser consider in light of the way the particular token was marketed and sold.
And just following on that, a lot of people talk about secondary market trading as perhaps being one of the factors here. One of the things that I mentioned on the last panel that I have trouble wrapping my mind around is, as trading liquidity increases, there is this desire to believe that you have a financial instrument, when in fact trading liquidity does not mean that necessarily that you have a financial instrument. So the fact that a secondary trading market exists for a token or for any other product or service shouldn't mean that it is by definition a security. On the other hand, if you spend all your time trying to create a secondary market for the token, you may run into some of these questions around the manner of sale and creating that expectation of profits from people. So this is an area where we caution people to be careful about what their activities are, because they may be trying to accomplish goals in a way that will make things look more like an investment and a security.
So the next point, I just would like to step back for a second and mention, it may sound as though we 100% agree on every principle that comes up. And actually, it's taken a lot of work to derive these principles and to develop the FAQs that we'll talk about in a few minutes. This next point is something where I will mention a difference of opinion that some have. And I think it's important to point this out because we really are working with many of our colleagues, even those whom we may share very different views about things. Everybody is trying to work together to find a reasoned answer. So the next point is that utility tokens must ultimately have some consumptive value. Now, there are differing views as to whether you must be able to consume that token immediately upon its sale. So that is a point where people have different views. But we all agree that there must be some utility. There must be some consumptive value for a utility token. Just building on that, manner of sale likely will not be the only factor relevant to articulating the dividing line between a utility and an investment token. Courts will need to determine that the token is consumable in the first place and perhaps assess whether the tokens have hallmarks of other securities like profit rights, etc. The key to defining the scope of securities law likely will be whether the transaction is primarily for commercial rather than investment purposes.
Terrific. And I know we're probably running a little long, so for everybody, we're just about done. My last kind of high-level point is to make a critical distinction for all of you. What we're talking about here, the three of us and the much wider group that helped develop these principles, is the law as we believe it exists today, as it's been enumerated by courts, by other decisions, by interpretation by the SEC, the law as we see it today. It's very important to bear in mind that the chair of the SEC has been extremely clear that they believe, as an enforcement matter, that many, if not all, the tokens they are aware of are securities. That is not a statement of the law. That's a statement of an enforcement position. But if you seek to sell a token, you need to be aware that the SEC and other law enforcement officials have taken very aggressive views, and you need to be aware of that. We cannot tell you whether or not there will be an enforcement action. All we can tell you is our best view of what the law is. That's kind of my last kind of high-level thought to share with you. More specifically in terms of the principles, because of the close connection between tokens that are consumptive in nature and tokens that are securities, people sometimes get tangled up around what disclosure needs to be provided. To the extent your token is not a security, there is no express requirement about providing certain information as you would find when a security is being sold. But that doesn't mean no disclosure should be provided. With any product that is being sold, making sure your customer understands what that product is, what its limitations are, and how it works, and when it'll be available to work, to Josh's point, are critical, and information of that type is still very important. So what your white paper, or lack of a better term, says becomes very, very critical. Some, considering these kind of complex relationships, have said, perhaps it would be more prudent if we limit purchasers of our product to very sophisticated large entities that, in another context, might be considered an accredited investor. And that's a valid position to take. We don't really know what the right way to go is, and it's a discussion you should be having with your external counsel about whether a step like that, or whether using one of the crowdfunding exemptions to the extent you can, is appropriate for you, even if you believe you do have a utility token. Those are all discussions you should be having with your counsel.
And maybe just to one final point from my perspective at a broad level. Look, there are certain types of securities that are well known and well understood in the industry. And as Josh alluded to earlier, as Lewis alluded to earlier, you can create a token that is a security. And many people think that in the not too distant future, all securities are just going to exist on a blockchain and be traded on a blockchain. That's a perfectly valid view. That's a view that I think many people hold. And so when you're trying to construct your token, think about what your objectives are. Think about whether or not you want to give some kinds of benefits that will make your token look like a security, because that's not the end of the world, right? It just means you have to comply with the securities laws, and people have been doing that since 1933.
All right. I wanted to run through quickly some of the questions that we're going to address, just very briefly. This will not be all of the questions that we're going to address, but just so you're aware, what do people mean when they refer to cryptocurrency, utility tokens, TGEs, ICOs, etc.? What framework does one apply when determining whether a given token is a security? What elements of the Howey test are particularly relevant when considering whether a token is a security? Are there any prima facie indicators that a token is a security? Does it matter if the platform is built at the time of the sale of tokens? Does the intent of the buyers matter? Does manner of sale affect whether a token is a security? If a seller believes a token is not a security, but out of caution, sells the token in compliance with securities laws as if it were a security, does this make the token a security? Does the utility token seller's cooperation with an exchange render the token a security? Can a non-security token become a security as a result of integration? Is Ethereum a security? And do airdrops implicate the securities laws? So those are some of the questions that we're going to address. And there are sub-questions within some of those questions. Now, Ron?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I realize we're running a bit over. Just real quickly, I never have been on a panel where the Howey test, the Pledge of Allegiance, and peanut butter cookies are all brought up in one instance. So I realize we're running long. There's a lot of work here. My deepest thanks to the Legal Working Group and all of its members. If you wanted additional information about the Legal Working Group, certainly do reach out to me or WSBA.co. You're doing amazing work, and from the board and all of the members, I want to personally thank all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go offline if you want to ask questions.